In the southwesternmost part of the map in Fallout New Vegas, you'll find a location called the NCR Ranger Outpost Mojave, or just the Mojave Outpost, notable for the massive Unification Monument which can be seen from vast distances throughout the game. At the far end, there is a gate. Beyond, the wasteland stretches for as far as the player can see. This gate is locked, behind a key that doesn't exist. It functions as one of the borders of the game world, a diegetic barrier keeping the player inside the confines of the game. But it doesn't exist solely to keep the player in. This gate is keeping something out, something which the developers left to be forgotten, something dangerous. Beyond the barriers they placed, there are unanswered questions, ghosts which refuse to be forgotten. There's something hiding outside of bounds in Fallout New Vegas. Saturday, November 25th, 2023. Reddit user codename RojoVivo posts to the r/creepygaming subreddit. Weird new Fallout New Vegas channel that I found. Art project? ARG? Mod? Side note, if you're looking for a place to find some of these web series and get in on the ground floor, keep an eye on r/creepygaming. They get posted there a lot. The post links to a channel with the name Dr. Bosch, created in May of 2022. The name is a reference to Hieronymus Bosch, a painter from the early Renaissance, and the profile picture meets us with the eerie gaze of an NCR Ranger. The description informs us that we will be looking at a collection of old vids. Taking a look at these old vids published to the channel, we can see that they're all centered around gameplay of Fallout New Vegas. As someone with a fairly limited experience with the Fallout universe, I'll also be referring to the comments of other viewers a few times throughout this video when they point out an interesting connection or detail, so I'll be putting those on screen when I mention them. Without any more delay, let's take a look at Dr. Bosch's first video, Fallout New Vegas, outside the Mojave Outpost. The video starts at the Mojave Outpost. Text on the screen informs us that the player accidentally discovered that they can jump out of the outpost's invisible barrier, or lack thereof, and into the wasteland beyond, a place that should just be background decoration spanning for unknown miles. After making it over and looking around a bit, they decide to continue exploring and making updates on what they find. Looking to the description, we can gather a little bit more context. This video seems to have originally been made as evidence for a discussion taking place on an outside forum, with someone named Mark suggesting they record it. Interestingly enough, over 10 years ago, July 25th, 2013, a YouTube channel by the name of Jacob Novak uploaded a video titled How to Get Through the Gate at the Mojave Outpost in Fallout, perhaps an inspiration for this series? The video appears to be 100% genuine, and though their route around the gate is different, it ends up in the same place. I went to check on it myself to see if it was real, and yeah. Okay. So we're gonna wanna go here. Okay, let me see if I can remember how they did this. It's up this way. Up onto here. And then from here, we go up around this way, I believe. It's up through this way, maybe? Yes. I believe I'm on the right track here. We are officially out of bounds of the game. You could just no clip through here, but that's, you know, like, that's cheating. Plus, like, I don't know if you're on console if you could do that. This is there's something to this, I think, that makes it a little bit extra. Here we are, outside of the bounds of the game. It was almost a little bit eerie finding myself in the same place as Dr. Bosch, knowing what they discovered here only a few videos later, though I found nothing more than empty desert myself.
I'm here in Agua Fria, Arizona. That name will be familiar to you if you've listened to Marty Robbins' gunfighter ballad classic, Big Iron. So, Dr. Bosch sets out into a newly unexplored environment outside of the bounds of the game, outside of the scope of the developers. The journey begins into a wasteland unknown.
Though this video has a much longer title with a string of characters, for the purposes of this video I'll just be calling it Mojave Raw 1. The description of the video explains that this is raw, unedited gameplay footage initially just passed around to friends and the forum. The player continues wandering through the out-of-bounds wasteland as they pass the last few telephone poles and the last sites of the outpost disappear. The sound of crickets and the radio from their Pip-Boy provide ambience to an otherwise silent atmosphere. As the last of the fractured road gives way to the dusty terrain and the player moves further out of the map, they catch a glimpse of something. It appears to be some kind of radio equipment, perhaps an antenna or a receiver. I'm not really sure. I should again preface here that I'm not really a Fallout expert and I've never even finished New Vegas, so pardon some of the blind spots if you can. I've done my best. Further into the wasteland, as the sun is setting, the player spots a building and they make their way over. On the way, they find that they are officially out of the map's boundaries. Arriving at the small building, they find it to be a dilapidated shack with inconsistent collision. Nearby, there are more bits of ruined architecture. The existence of these, so far outside of the map, is completely strange. It suggests some kind of intentionality behind their placement, despite being outside the scope of the game. In one of the burnt-out buildings, the player finds a series of bottles, cans, and a plate laid out neatly on a slab of concrete and a mattress nearby, like someone's been here. This suspicion of occupation seems to be reinforced when they stumble across a makeshift fire pit surrounded by benches, empty whiskey bottles, and a lunchbox. As the player interacts with this lunchbox, the game adds a quest. M. Johnson Ver, YEDGSHCH. Very strange. The quest places a marker on their map displayed in the Pip-Boy as M. Johnson Ver Quest 5, and with this new target in mind, the video ends. The next video starts with the player flipping through the Pip-Boy radio. Most of the stations play nothing, some emit static. Eventually, they make their way back to the Mojave outpost and try to clip back into the map, presumably to make their way to the quest marker, only to find that the barrier which had previously been absent, allowing the player to get to this area in the first place, has reappeared. They can't get back in, and can't even fast travel to other areas of the map in order to escape. They're trapped in an endless expanse. Strangely, they stumble across some items in the ruins just outside the outpost which weren't there before. More evidence to the idea that the player isn't entirely alone out here. Now stuck with no other options than to continue exploring the wasteland, a few bits of ambience seem to spook them. So they whip out the Pip-Boy and try to put some music on. Still nothing. I just think it's a great character moment, trying to drown out the spooky ambient sounds. Still stuck out of bounds, the player slowly attempts to make their way around to the quest marker as the wind blusters through the wasteland. They notice some small objects in the distance, and as they approach, their radio picks up a signal, a station called UVB-68, emitting static, pulsing sounds and difficult to discern voices. That name may sound familiar to you, because it is very similar to the real-life shortwave broadcast UVB-76, aka The Buzzer. This shortwave station transmits a repeating buzzing sound all day, every day, occasionally interrupted by messages in Russian. The exact purpose of this station is unclear, though most theories center on some kind of Russian military use. This is very likely a direct reference being made here with the UVB-68 station, and there are portions where you can even hear what sounds like the buzzer coming from the static of UVB-68. Even more interestingly, other call signs have been transmitted from UVB-76 over the years, one of which is YEDGSHCH, the string of characters we see at the end of the player's mysterious M. Johnson quest. It's as if this quest is being directed by or correlated to this UVB-68 station. While we're on the topic of the radio, though, I think it's probably relevant to bring up one of the more popular creepypastas surrounding New Vegas, the Lone Wolf Radio. The Lone Wolf Radio is a location in the game, a busted trailer filled with radio equipment. Graffiti on the trailer reads, "Keep out. Everyone is gone. I am all alone. Let it all end." The creepypasta goes that there was a cut quest line which involved the Lone Wolf, who occupied the makeshift radio station, broadcasting disturbing ramblings at 2 a.m. in game time, and even sacrificing people on air. The author of the creepypasta gets the cut quest working in their game and finds that the voice acting for these sections seems to include real sounds of murder, and discover files within the game which show the victims. All in all, it's a pretty standard creepypasta, but its focus on sinister radio frequencies feels significant to this series. The player makes their way to those small objects and finds them to be a kind of field of more radio equipment of some kind. Actually, I want to make a note of something here. I don't have it written in the script because I wasn't sure the importance of it, but the player ends up finding this smoking barrel, this trash can which seems like it's lit on fire. They approach it, and then it stops emitting smoke, and I really wasn't sure what its importance was, so I was going to skip over it initially, but I was realizing while going back through, this video is called Signal, and so the first part of the signal is this UVB station, but it occurs to me that another signal this title could be referencing is this as a smoke signal, that this is somehow directing the player on this path further. Continuing to wander the wasteland and moving further toward their quest marker, they find a shack with a dead tree and a car outside. Entering the door to the shack, they find themselves in a dark, dilapidated wooden room. The radio signal is lost. The video ends. Inside the furnished shack, the player finds MREs, books, what looks to be surgical equipment, and even a hunting shotgun in a bathtub, which they can't pick up. The inside of the bathroom appears to be flipped upside down, tables and chairs affixed to the ceiling. In one of the most brilliant moments of the series so far, the player picks up a physics object in the form of a children's play block. A tooltip appears reading, "Good. Now push Z to let go of the skull," causing the player to drop the item in alarm. After rooting through the shack and finding a finger, they discover the items Black Box 10:19 a.m., Black Box 10:17 a.m., Picture 10:15 a.m., and Developed Film. After picking these items up, a new point of interest is added to their quest with the title MJV Code Yourself Smarter. This name is a reference to a quest from Van Buren, the codename for Black Isle Studios' cancelled version of Fallout 3, which inspired large parts of Fallout New Vegas. We'll be coming back to Van Buren, but for now, the quest it's referencing seems fairly innocuous. If you had a low enough intelligence, you could use a computer to fix a defect in your brain and increase your intelligence points. After the player picks up a flare gun they find within the shack, they look over the items they found. Black Box 1019 appears to be some set of blueprints or schematics. 1017 is an audio recording. As those in the comments have pointed out, this is actually audio from the Gulf of Sidra incident, a territory dispute between Libya and the US in the Gulf of Sidra, which led to multiple air combat engagements between the US and Libyan pilots in 1981 and 1989. The audio we hear is the radio chatter between US pilots in 1989, as far as I've been able to identify. An interesting incident to reference, but it's difficult to make heads or tails of its importance within these videos. When the Libyan government claimed the Gulf of Sidra, they called this border the Line of Death, and perhaps this reference is telling the player that they have crossed their own virtual line of death, an ominous warning of the dangers therein. 1015 shows some kind of landscape from somewhere up high, and developed film appears to be an image of radio towers atop a mountain, which appears to be Black Mountain in Nevada, which also appears as a location in the game. Without much else to discover within the eerie cabin, the player leaves. 2 different loading screens appear in rapid succession, and the video ends. The player roots around the exterior of the shack, finding various loot and an ear. This whole place is littered with dismembered pieces. Out back, UVB-68 picks up again, and they find some computers. The terminals are filled with mostly errors, but one opens to text about firearm maintenance in the game. From here, the player spots a large radio tower and heads toward it. As they approach, more towers load in, massive and derelict, a site reminiscent of Black Mountain. Another makeshift camp has been set up inside one of the buildings nearby. They find a hunk simply called Remains, which has a file not found error, and eat it? Okay, I guess I'm not one to judge. Then, more radio equipment inside a nearby camper, which I can't help but feel evokes the Lone Wolf radio. Continuing to wander the mountains, after finding an area of scorched and irradiated rock, the player attempts to make their way up the mountain further, toward the towers, only to be met with invisible barriers. Trying to navigate around them, they discover a massive sort of fence or wall made of concrete, rebar, and barbed wire. Finding a break in the wall, on the other side, there's yet more blustering wasteland. In this valley of sorts, the player finds yet more ruins, which leads them to an area called Canyon Wreckage, also a place that can be found in the actual surface area of the game, interestingly enough, actually pretty near the Lone Wolf radio trailer. It's like this is an area where the 2 worlds are overlapping, but the player is still trapped in their side of the wasteland. In the wreckage of the canyon, the player finds a hatch that leads to a bunker. They enter and descend the stairs, reaching a large door at the bottom, which opens into a sort of storage or computer room. There are these strange, small hatch doors in the walls, and a bedroll with the item description, "Well-preserved sleeping bag, hasn't been used in a while." The player interacts with one of the terminals and tries to open a series of menus, all with the title null, meaning whatever text is supposed to be there, if anything at all, is missing or empty. However, clicking on a few of these null menus does reveal some information, mostly photos which have been cropped too much to really make anything useful of, except for what may be part of the Lucky 38 casino from the game, with some kind of aircraft trails above it. Planes? Missiles? Another appears to be an email. Loading it into the console crashes everything. I knew he'd pull something like this. And subject truck. You sure this is the right truck? And another showcasing some kind of cargo manifest, which eagle-eyed viewers have pointed out seems to be that of the Platinum chip at the center of Fallout New Vegas' story. The player then stumbles across a briefcase, which acts as if it will count as being stolen if you take it. Naturally, the player picks it up and tries to use it. This activates a ticking noise and a danger indication as if it might explode, but it doesn't. Instead, they're rewarded with XP like they've completed some part of a quest. Strange. Heading out of the bunker and back into the wasteland, they notice something altogether odd. Fish, swimming through the air. It's one of the more surreal moments in these videos. Floating by, slowly maneuvering through the air. Reality works differently here. Just as the player is shaking off this peculiar sight, they stumble across a massive pit within the mountains. Continuing the episode's theme of descents into the earth, it ends. The description of this video informs us that this footage was sent in from someone else, and alleges to contain gameplay showing a strange glow beyond a mountain. Dr. Bosch admits they can't really see it themselves. The player in this clip does seem to be looking at something, but with the quality of the video, it's hard for me to tell either. Even turning up the brightness and contrast doesn't reveal much, though it's possible to maybe make out a faint red glow. What this video does reveal, however, is the possibility of other people's experiences with strange happenings in Fallout New Vegas being possible topics for future uploads on the channel. One other thing of note is that this ridgeline does have specific importance in New Vegas. This is where you can find a crashed UFO in the game. Here, however, it's empty. For now though, we're back to Dr. Bosch's wasteland. The player begins their descent into the inky darkness of the pit they discovered in ground. The light of the flare gun does little to reveal what's at the bottom, but eventually something does appear. A light, a radio or black box emitting static, and a chessboard. On one side, there's a place for a person to sit. On the other, a computer. This feels as if it's evoking Maniac 1, the first computer to defeat a human opponent in a game of chess, though technically a modified version of the game. Or perhaps Zax, a type of computer intelligence in the Fallout games. At one point, the radio plays a series of beeps in quick succession. Morse code. Though it's difficult to make out, using the spectrogram of the audio to transcribe it, we can find the Morse code reads, "This thing's hollow. It goes on forever and..." This is a quote from Arthur C. Clarke's novelization of 2001: A Space Odyssey, spoken by David Bowman as he's entering the Stargate. The full quote is, "The thing's hollow. It goes on forever and, oh my god, it's full of stars." Elsewhere in the massive darkness of this pit, the player finds a door. Entering it, they find themselves in a near pitch-black cave system, empty, aside from a few drained whiskey bottles littering the floor.
Dr. Bosch entering this system of caves marks a decided shift in the series, a new chapter. While the wasteland isn't gone for good, for now it's going to be replaced with these claustrophobic halls of stone. While there's no doubt there's an eeriness to the expansive wasteland, there's something different about a cave. It's like there's nowhere to run, that there could be anything in the dark. And getting lost out in the open is one thing, but getting lost in here is altogether more terrifying. This isn't my first time in this cave. The first time was for a video that hasn't finished yet, and I'm feeling now what I felt then. That sure, the fear of getting stuck or lost or trapped or that there's something in the darkness is scary, but the scariest feeling is the thought in the back of your head, the call of the cave. The inexplicable feeling, the calling to just keep going forward, just around the next bend, then the next, until there's nowhere to go. With that in mind, let's head back to Dr. Bosch.
What the hell? Oh my God.
The player picks up a knife from the ground and then proceeds to stumble upon some minecarts with a radio inside, playing some barely intelligible sounds. As they continue exploring, they come across an alarming sight. Bloodstains and massive gibs, aka pieces of game gore that have been scaled up, rib cages, bloody chunks of meat. The discoveries continue with makeshift encampments, heads on spikes, and a crib with a blue first place ribbon. The ambience in the cave gives the impression they're not alone, not to mention all the evidence of occupancy. Computer consoles, more encampments, water pumps, massive face statues sticking through the stone. Finding a sheer pit further into darkness, the player is faced with the option to exit to Null, deeper into the cave system, where disturbingly they find a body, which matches perfectly to the player. It even has the name Hieronymus B. In its inventory, there's a note titled Instructions. Set it up. You will know where. Unknown friends will come to you. Ominous. Nearby, another pit invites the player to enter Tunnel to Null, which leads them yet further into the cave, this time appearing a little bit more like an organized mine shaft, wooden supports and metal gates. A final doorway to Null brings them into a room, the cave walls giving way to artificially lit wallpaper. It's nondescript, some raised platforms, doors leading to bathrooms, a counter of some kind. It's unclear what this space is even for, if anything at all. Lights with no source illuminate the room. It appears to be one of the test cells in New Vegas, essentially dev levels within the game's files. Through another doorway in this room, the player finds themselves descending a staircase. Attempting to open the door at the bottom, the video corrupts for a moment, then ends. At the beginning of this video, it almost appears as if the game has spit the player back out. After a brief glitch, they find themselves back in a stairwell, half their health missing and their items scattered. With no way back up, the door at the bottom opens into another room, similar to the one from the previous video, but brighter and more furnished, like some kind of unfinished dining hall, restaurant, or bar. A mural of blacked out faces is painted and cracked on the wall next to the bar. Sitting at one of the tables, they are met with a plate full of meat and acrylonitrile and a book titled Trimorphic Protanoia. The book gives an error message in the Pip-Boy, but does increase the character's speech. Acrylonitrile is a kind of chemical used in the creation of plastics, known for having a garlic or onion smell to it, and the book is the title of a Gnostic text, split into 3 descents in the voice of Barbelo, a deity which appears in many ancient Gnostic Christian works. If you're not super familiar with Gnosticism, we'll talk about it later, so don't worry. The player continues to explore this strange underground structure. Entering into the blinding light behind one door, it leads to yet more increasingly dilapidated rooms. At the end, the player can see some kind of skeletal figure, but getting too close exposes the character to an immense amount of radiation, so for now they back off. In another room, 2 symbols are found. These belong to what are called the hobo signs, a language of symbols used to communicate information about noteworthy locations to other hobos. Whether these were actually ever commonly used among this population is debatable, but these symbols do appear in New Vegas's game files, and here they are on the wall. To the best of my research, this means something to the effect of, "Hold your tongue, nothing is here, doubtful." Eventually, the player makes their way into what seems to be the interior of a house. The architecture is strange, areas flipped upside down, doorways blocked by radios. The player opens a computer, the terminal filled with more null tabs, leading to what appears at first to just be gibberish. Then passages from Melville's Moby Dick and what appears to be excerpts from Borges's 3 versions of Judas. We'll definitely be coming back to the significance of these texts, but for now, I want to actually focus on this gibberish. It's actually formatted in a very specific way, a way that seems to replicate the website The Library of Babel, itself based on another short story by Borges. Again, we'll talk more in depth about it later, but the concept is that of a near endless library which contains books filled with what are believed to be every single combination of letters and punctuation possible. Though this means most of the volumes contain a meaningless mishmash of letters, it also means that somewhere in there you can find every book ever written, as well as every book ever written but off by 1 word or 1 letter. It's a bit like the monkeys at a typewriter hypothetical. The website, libraryofbabel.info, creates a virtual version of this library, and the text appears in a format very similar to that shown in these computers. I think the idea here is that these excerpts from Melville or Borges are a part of an endless library like this, with the chaos occasionally bubbling up with something intelligible or even previously written before being swallowed again into the jumble of the alphabet. The choices of literature are important to the themes of the story, but that reference to this infinite random library is the main takeaway I want to stick with here. Finally, the last bit of text appears again to just be random letters, but its formatting suggests that this may actually be an encoded message. And it is. Using a ROT13 cipher, we can find that it's actually a passage from another Gnostic text, Eunostos the Blessed. Again, we'll be coming back to all of these, but this series is so dense with things like this, it's best not to dwell on them until we've gone all the way through. After exploring this strange house, the player moves back to the lounge area and sits at the bar. The player enters a door from the lounge, leading to a series of pool and showering areas. Another leads to a heavily locked door. They attempt to use a console command to unlock it, causing a jolt and more health to be taken away. No cheats allowed here, it seems. Checking the map, it's been overlaid with this 7-pointed star-like flowery symbol, a heptagram, hellish colors surrounding it, and more doors lead to yet more doors. After walking through a catwalk in pitch darkness and glimpsing some kind of perhaps radio tower in the dark, the player finds a key in an industrial-looking zone and is now able to unlock the fortified door. Inside, things seem a bit worse for wear, and further in, we find a tunnel stretching out into some kind of underground, sci-fi adjacent navigational area. Through a window, a series of nuclear missiles are stored beneath the earth. Nearby, oddly, there's a door with one rad roach in a white void. After being hit, it falls in an endless loop. The player then finds themselves in a series of hallways reminiscent of the Gomorrah Hotel in the regular game. This area seems to defy logic in similar ways to places we've seen before, like upside-down rooms. The player takes a rest in one of the beds, which briefly gives us the in-game date of 12-98-79, a clearly impossible date. After briefly encountering a static-emitting radio, one of the doors opens by itself. Cautiously entering, the player finds a bathtub full of dark liquid, inviting them to once again enter Null. They're taken to a series of halls and rooms that feel reminiscent of a hospital or asylum, though most of the rooms are filled with bathroom stalls and red dice. When the player finds a pool of red liquid in the corner of a dilapidated room, they drink it. They are definitely going to get some kind of disease. Peering into an inaccessible doorway, the player finds cages and medical equipment cluttering the room, with some kind of body laid out on a medical table. As the player attempts to get a good look, a sound catches their attention down the hall. The sound of soft but quickly approaching footsteps. Frantically, the player runs in the opposite direction as the footsteps continue gaining ground. And the video ends. The description of this video reads June 1st, 2012, 18:58:23. Scraping the hard drive, managed to salvage this. Judging by the date, we get the idea that this footage is from over a decade ago. It's unclear if all the footage we've seen so far is that old, or if it's just this bit. The description also seems to tell us that something has happened to Dr. Bosch's hard drive, and the fate of any further videos is, at this point, unclear. The video itself appears to be the opening screens for Fallout New Vegas, but there's a very important detail here. The Black Isle Studios and Interplay logos. Black Isle Studios and publisher Interplay were the team working on Van Buren, that earlier attempt at Fallout 3 which would inspire parts of New Vegas that I mentioned earlier. They did not, however, actually work on New Vegas. It does still seem to end on the title screen for New Vegas, so it's really unclear if this is supposed to be some alternate lost version of New Vegas created by Black Isle Studios, or a strange mishmash of the two games, or an alternate universe. Either way, it ends just as quickly as it began. The description of this video confirms our suspicions on the fate of future video captures. A vid or two left to salvage, the rest are beyond repair. So, something happened to Dr. Bosch's computer which corrupted much of the footage that was recorded. Let's see what's left. The player has made their way out of the hospital area where they were being chased, and back to the hotel hallways. Things within this area continue to be reality bending, with one room even featuring massive, oversized furniture, like everything has been scaled up. While wandering the halls, the player continuously passes various paintings on the walls. I've been able to identify most of them which appear in this video. They all seem to be paintings from Francisco Goya, specifically Goya's Black Paintings, a series of pieces Goya created seemingly without any intent on ever sharing with the public in the later part of his life. The most famous of these probably being Saturn devouring his son, though none of these pieces were ever given names by Goya himself. The ones I've been able to identify in this video specifically are A Pilgrimage to the Fountain of San Isidro, Asmodia, The Dog, and Witch's Sabbath. Because of the private nature of these paintings, there isn't much we know for sure about them, other than that they seem to reflect Goya's own bitter and pessimistic outlook during this time due to his deteriorating health and the political and societal unrest at the time. They all seem to portray moments of great terror or misery. I should also probably mention that I am not an art historian, and this is all coming from very preliminary research on the topic, my sources for which will be in a document below. I do think it's important to note though, because art and literature have continued to be important references throughout this series, and these paintings will play a part in my larger analysis of the series later. The picture frames around these halls also contain a painting which I am unable to identify, but appears to show a landscape at sunset with a cross silhouetted against the horizon, and behind an inaccessible curtain, there's another difficult to discern painting and a newspaper headline. Something about an investigation of some kind, but it's really hard to make out from this distance. We'll be coming back to this newspaper clipping, but if any of you can identify the paintings I wasn't, let me know in the comments. Eventually, the player finds a large metallic door which leads to what appears to be some kind of medical area, at the center of which is a large pod. Inside, a skeletal corpse lies in a pile of its own viscera. I believe this pod is a model used in the game as a virtual reality pod. The player takes out the briefcase they collected all the way back in the video ground and tosses it at the pod. This gives us a message from the game. The M. Johnson quest has been completed. Interesting. I must share the sentiment with commenter Alexis Electronic. Such an intuitive quest that was. Without any more direction, the player finds themselves entering another doorway, this time to an elevator into Null, which leads them back into a cave system, this time filled with heavier vegetation. Here, they find another body which looks eerily similar to them, this time with just the name Null, then another body, then an entire pile. It's completely strange and unsettling. Are these threats aimed toward the player? A glitch? More evidence of some kind of crossed realities? Previous players who found themselves in the same position as Dr. Bosch? Further into the cave, they find one more doorway, pure light radiating from it. Entering Null yet again. We've almost reached the end. Just 2 more videos. For this video, the description tells us that Dr. Bosch is still looking for more clips. The player finds themselves in a void full of floating platforms, disconnected bits of rooms. A skeleton stands on one nearby. Using an invisible walkway, they make their way over to the skeleton, which appears like a living NPC but doesn't talk. Hopping over to a glowing doorway, the player enters another threshold. Through here, they are back in the surface wasteland, surrounded by the dilapidated ruins nearby the radio towers from a few episodes ago. It's dark, almost too dark to see. Something not too distant bangs to the ground and kicks up dust. Terrifying ambience begins. Then something bigger, closer. The terrified player finds an entrance to a tunnel just in time to escape. Here, the player discovers the underground wreckage of a kind of railway, along with a bag of gore and a skeleton in some kind of makeshift camp with a single shotgun. Taking this welcome new form of defense, the player exits through a gate into the wastes and finds themselves outside again, atop a mountain in another small encampment. Here the player finds another corpse titled Last Men, from which they take a revolver. And though they seem to have escaped whatever danger they had encountered by the radio towers, the wastes would not leave the player in safety for too long. Taking into account the description of this video and the opening few seconds featuring a cloudy red sky and a high-pitched buzzing, it seems pretty clear that while partially recovered, this video file is still pretty corrupted. The player is surrounded again by radio towers and mountain walls. Scattered lanterns barely function to light up anything. A howling wind whips through the canyon. Cutting through the corruption, the player is now inside the ruins of some kind of dilapidated skyscraper. Throughout this video, we keep cutting between the interior and exterior of what appears to be a ruined city, sagging high-rises and crumbling concrete. As they continue to explore, a garbled radio plays. It's hard to distinguish exactly what is being said, as it seems to switch between multiple channels, but I've done my best to subtitle what I can make out.
Its purpose is to promote interest and to provide training in military communications procedures and equipment.
I want else to know what we were doing.
Regardless of who is the sponsor. I don't think anybody working in that time in the remotest ever thought that it would blow up into the kind of thing that it did.
The full reason why Senator Booster has sponsored and pushed this investigation. If the senator would stop evading the question I have asked him.
Some kind of investigation, presumably high stakes, involving the military and high-ranking government officials. At this point, I'm not entirely sure what the origins of these audio clips are, but it feels linked, if only thematically, to the newspaper article seen in Pod. As the video continues cutting rapidly due to the file's corruption, we see a brief moment where the player seems to be hiding from something unseen, the game ominously warning caution at the top of the screen. We haven't really seen anything too explicit as of yet, but it seems pretty clear at this point, from the footsteps to the monstrous screeching to now this, that there's something in the wasteland pursuing our player. Inside one of these apocalyptic buildings, the player wanders, seemingly on edge as they explore. Their map is tinted a deep red. Picking up a stray key, they come across yet more paintings. One is a portion of the Bosch painting Garden of Earthly Delights, specifically a portion of the work depicting Hell, which appears eerily similar to the environment which the player is currently inhabiting. Another painting they discover is The Son of Man by René Magritte. I'll come back to the painting analysis later. Interestingly, we also get a closer look at the Under Investigation newspaper. The full headline reads, "House Under Investigation, Robco's Future Uncertain." This is a reference to the character of Mr. House, the founder of robotics megacorp Robco in the Fallout universe, and an important character to the plot of Fallout New Vegas. On this page, there's also a reference to Strange Lights over Pahrump, a real place in Nevada, but one that doesn't really appear in New Vegas, aside from a reference in unused graffiti. It feels like it's alluding to UFOs, but also perhaps the Weird Glow video from earlier. Though there's a lot to chew on, the video doesn't end on such a relaxed note. Another cut shoves us into more dark ruins, this time ablaze as horrifying ambience plays. Suddenly, something jumps from the darkness, the player fires, and the video ends. And that's the latest video on the channel, as of now. There is one more secret this video has to offer though. Running the audio of the episode through spectrogram analysis, we can find that some of the glitched audio actually creates some images. The first just being some kind of cute smiley face design, and the second being what appears to be Mr. House stepping down from an airplane. As far as I've been able to find, these are the only spectrogram images in the series so far, but as more videos come out, it's worth to keep in mind for the future. As of now though, that's the end. The mysteries of the wasteland only seem farther out of reach, but we've been given an awful lot to chew on. The only thing left to do is to try and tie these threads together and see what we come up with on the other side. But truly understanding the complex web of information we've been given is a journey all of its own. So let's start trekking. This series is dense. I try not to over-explain every episode in these breakdowns, but with Dr. Bosch, it's like something new every minute. To give ourselves an easier time with our analysis, let's start simple. The player, who we can safely assume is Dr. Bosch, discovers that the invisible barrier keeping them from crossing out to the other side of the Mojave outpost is gone, and they can simply jump over. Sharing this discovery on some kind of outside forum, someone named Mark suggests that they record it and show their fellow users. From here, the forum discussions presumably continue as the player records more and explores further. After being unable to re-enter into the surface world of the game, there's nothing else to do but continue wandering out of bounds. At some point, I would wager due to something they ran into in the game, their hard drive is corrupted and leaves the player with only pieces of their documented journey. The description of the channel calls these uploads old vids, and considering the Movie Maker vibe of the first one and the date given to the recovered intro recording as 2012, it's possible these are all from that same period, though none of this is confirmed. And the reason these are being uploaded, or perhaps re-uploaded now, is anyone's guess. So, that's what's happening outside the world of the game itself. What about inside Dr. Bosch's unusual copy of Fallout New Vegas? It gets weird, in ways I haven't even mentioned yet. Subtle details that you may gloss over on a first watch, many things that I missed which were brought to my attention via reading the comments. The element probably most obvious is the connection this series makes to Van Buren.
The first two entries in the Fallout series were created by Black Isle Studios and Interplay Productions, and work eventually began on Fallout 3, codenamed Van Buren. This game, much like New Vegas, would take place in the Mojave Desert, but the majority of its story and characters were completely different. Eventually, though, Black Isle Studios would shut down, and the Fallout series would instead be handed to Bethesda Softworks, who created an entirely new Fallout 3. Bethesda would then publish Fallout New Vegas, developed by Obsidian Games. New Vegas would end up incorporating elements from Van Buren, including the main setting of the Mojave. This history is important because there's a special connection there between Van Buren and New Vegas, but New Vegas was not developed by Black Isle or Interplay. Which makes it all the stranger that in that intro video, we see the splash screens for Black Isle and Interplay. The title doesn't even say Fallout 3, it still says New Vegas. And the game we see is very much the Bethesda-style RPG, not the isometric turn-based game that was planned for Van Buren. So what does this mean? Well, along with other inconsistencies we'll begin to see, it almost feels like we're peeking into an alternate universe, where Black Isle did develop the third Fallout game, and both Fallout 3 and New Vegas have been combined. For more Van Buren connections, we have the direct name drop of the Code Yourself Smarter quest from Van Buren, and the quest name M. Johnson. President Martin Van Buren, from which the project derived its codename, served with Vice President Richard M. Johnson. And then there's the items. Tons of items show up in this playthrough that shouldn't be here. Weapons and text from Fallout 3 or DLCs. At one point, the player finds a syringe titled Morphine. This was the original name, but the actual name of this item in-game is Med-X. The name was changed due to censorship, so why is it here? Little details like this are scattered throughout the world, which seem to combine other games in the series or games that never shipped altogether. Then there's the little things, which can be extrapolated into even stranger connections, like the statue heads found in the caves, which have been connected to the Dunwich mystery in Fallout 3 and 4, which directly references H.P. Lovecraft and some kind of secretive cosmic entity.
And what about all this stuff surrounding Mr. House? He shows up in newspaper clippings and spectrograms, and his Lucky 38 hotel and casino
appears in a photo with what may be missiles streaking across the sky above it. And an even stranger detail is where the Lucky 38 doesn't appear. Though the quality makes it difficult to discern, the splash screen for New Vegas in the intro video appears to be missing something crucial. The one we actually see in the game includes the Vegas skyline in the background, very prominently featuring the Lucky 38. In intro, it's missing. So what happened to Mr. House and the Lucky 38? In the story of the real game, Mr. House is an incredibly successful megacorp owner who protects Vegas from the destruction of the Great War,
allowing the Strip as well as himself and the Lucky 38 to survive.
With the imagery of the missiles overhead, the newspaper declaring him under investigation and his fate uncertain, and the missing Lucky 38, it's almost like in this alternate version of the game, the Lucky 38 didn't survive the war. But what does that actually even mean for the series? What is this mishmash of different games, concepts, and changes? The other possibility I see these details spelling out is a little less straightforward. That this is a regular copy of New Vegas, but outside the bounds of the game is almost a purgatory of sorts. A purgatory for the game. The influences, the changes, the origins, what could have been.
Where scrapped concepts and unimplemented ideas rot outside the confines of the neatly packaged world the developers meant for us to see.
More than a concrete place, a graveyard of creativity given a physical space as the player explores. In a way like the Lone Wolf Radio creepypasta, an exploration of the darker side of content which is cut from the game during development. The reason we know so much about Van Buren is because eventually the design documents for the game were leaked, giving the community a huge amount of details about this game that never was. The story, characters, gameplay, environments, though many of these documents were unfinished or placeholders. In some ways, the series almost feels like sifting through the documents themselves, disparate pieces of information, some familiar and some new, trying in vain to cobble together a clearer picture of what the game was actually going to be. It's a search for answers in incomplete information. And this, I think, is the core theme of the series, and it's only one of many connections this series makes which explores it. And as I go through more of them, you'll start to see just how strong this theme is throughout. To start, one commenter points out another connection which might finally help us understand the strange world our player resides in. Mad God is a film by effects artist Phil Tippett. It combines stop motion, live action, puppetry, and computer effects into an incredible, hellish journey. And there are some similarities here that feel too coincidental. The story follows a character known as the Assassin, dressed in similar garb to our player, descending into an ever-devolving pit of brutal and horrific worlds. Transporting a ticking briefcase of explosives, the Assassin witnesses constant horrors beyond comprehension. Seems fairly similar, right? There are even more connections to be made as well. We find out later that the Assassin is just one of many near-identical figures sent on the same mission, calling to mind the identical bodies we see in Dr. Bosch. The film deals heavily with the imagery and aftermath of nuclear war, and even includes a character referred to as the Last Man, which we also see in Dr. Bosch, both likely references to Nietzsche's Last Man concept, the archetypal passive nihilist and antithesis of the Übermensch. Now, I don't think the Dr. Bosch videos are a direct adaptation of Phil Tippett's film, but I think it's very likely that some of these references and inspirations are deliberate, and understanding Mad God's themes may help us understand some of the themes present in Dr. Bosch. Mad God seems to deal a lot with post-World War I and II philosophy, the nihilism and despair that came from grappling with the horrors of global warfare in the 20th century, and the existential threat that nuclear weapons introduced into the world, and the questioning of the social and power structures previously taken for granted. Throughout the film, characters all seem to be motivated with finding a solution to the endless chaotic cruelty the world of the movie is filled with. For some, that's simply destroying it, believing there is no solution other than ending the meaningless suffering for good. For others, it's trying to rebirth a new universe in the hopes that the opportunity will bring a better life for those after. The question at the core of these characters' minds is whether it's possible to find meaning in the universe, or if it's all senseless, random cruelty. And it's this focus on finding answers in a callous world filled with nihilistic cruelty and passivity to that cruelty, which I think holds the most relevance to Dr. Bosch. The wasteland Out of Bounds is filled with danger and terrifying imagery, many times calling direct parallels to the hellish worlds of Mad God. And just as terrifying as it is, it at times can also feel senseless and confusing. It asks us to decode messages and try to unravel its mysteries, but are there any answers to be found? This theme is further explored with Dr. Bosch's many literary and religious inclusions. I talked before about the multiple Gnostic texts which appear throughout the series. So what is Gnosticism? Well, I am again not an expert in ancient heretical Christian history, but a simple way to put it is a set of religious and philosophical ideas which emerged in certain Jewish and early Christian sects in the 1st and 2nd century. Thanks, Wikipedia. It's a very esoteric and spiritual school of thought, believing the material world to be inherently corrupt and abhorrent, created by a malevolent lesser god, while a higher perfect god and spiritual plane exists outside the material world, and only by shedding the material world can a soul be saved. Something the Gnostic beliefs and writings seem very focused on is the search or uncovering of secret truths or knowledge, finding enlightenment and spiritual insight via uncovering hidden wisdom. It seems like no accident to me that the series seems invested in bringing these writings up again and again, especially writings like Trimorphic Protonoia, a cosmological text coming from the voice of Barbelo, the first emanation of God, sharing with us truths of creation of the universe. It's this search for a larger answer, a truth in the corrupt world. And the series continues this exploration of finding spiritual truth with its inclusion of Borges' 3 versions of Judas. This story follows a man who presents his own hypothesis on the nature of Judas in the Bible, that without Judas, Jesus would not have been led to his death to the redemption of humanity. His beliefs evolve until he is convinced that ultimately it was not Jesus who made the ultimate human sacrifice for mankind, but was instead Judas, remembered as the ultimate traitor and turning away his own salvation. He was damned so that the rest of humanity could be redeemed. To limit all that happened to the agony of one afternoon on the cross would be blasphemous. And he goes on to say that Judas was the true human incarnation of God. God became a man completely, a man to the point of infamy, a man to the point of being reprehensible, all the way to the abyss. In order to save us, he could have chosen any of the destinies which together weave this uncertain web of history. He chose an infamous destiny. He was Judas. This discovery drives the character mad, believing this knowledge to be something intended by God to remain secret, and that by revealing it, he had committed a grand blasphemy. It calls to mind Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Judas, which claims that Judas was the only one who truly understood Jesus' message, while the other disciples foolishly worshipped the lesser, malevolent God who created the world, which I mentioned earlier. So, more stories included in the series, which contend with the uncovering of a hidden truth, an especially dark and metaphysical one at that. And it's not even the only work of Borges that does this, that is referenced in the series. Hell, that's even in this collection of stories. Two other literary works found within the series seem to exemplify this theme even more precisely. For one, Moby Dick, which feels like a self-evident inclusion in a story about a perhaps doomed search for truth in chaos. But Borges' other work being referenced, The Library of Babel, seems to be a perfect showcase. In the story, the universe is a library, filled with books which contain every possible combination of letters which could be held within one, a near infinite archive of all knowledge. For the most part, though, the books are meaningless, random, assortments of letters which are in no way discernible. One could spend their entire life in the library without ever finding a coherent sentence, and many do. And when the people who inhabit this universe die, they are lifted over the railings of the staircase of the incomprehensibly towering library and thrown into the void, falling for what may be an eternity. In life, they try in vain to find the answers to life's most important questions, prophecies which tell the entire future, the solutions to the most difficult philosophical problems, for all these exist within the library. But so do false prophecies, or works which end just before the answer, and the likelihood of anyone ever finding even one coherent manuscript is near zero. Centuries of librarians try to find meaning in the expanse of randomness, or even just the path to find meaning. We hear of philosophical movements coming and going, belief systems exerting power and eventually falling, all motivated to find the answers to their world in the pages of these near endless books. Obviously, the universe of this library can be read as a mirror of our own, but as it relates to Dr. Bosch, it seems almost too perfect of an encapsulation of our theme, the search for truth in chaos. But what about the paintings? Hieronymus Bosch, Goya's black paintings, René Magritte. Here, I think the theme is advanced twofold. On the one hand, they continue this idea of a disturbing and cruel world. Bosch's depictions of religious imagery are especially noteworthy for their disturbing and horrific portrayals, particularly of hell. Goya's black paintings are similar, though in a decidedly less fantastical fashion. These paintings, influenced by his bleak outlook and the personal suffering he experienced at this point in his life, portray moments of great terror, misery, and cruelty. They paint the most haunting parts of the human experience. But it's not only that. Their inclusion, in my view, is once again being used to draw us to this core theme. Goya created these paintings in the privacy of his home, on the walls themselves. He never gave them titles, at least not that we know of. He never discussed their meaning. They were private, not created with the intention of being seen by the outside world. This has left an enduring mystery to these paintings, no doubt encouraged by their darkness, their macabre nature. In their own way, the paintings have become a search for answers within a horrifying world, where viewers peer into the haunting scenes which Goya painted and try to unearth the meanings behind them, some insight into Goya's mind or the world in which he lived. As for The Son of Man, I'll leave this quote from Magritte himself on the painting.
Everything we see hides another thing. We always want to see what is hidden by what we see. There is an interest in that which is hidden and which the visible does not show us. This interest can take the form of a quite intense feeling, a sort of conflict, one might say, between the visible that is hidden and the visible that is present.
I think the literary works, paintings, and films which are referenced in this series are very intentional and serve to reinforce both the central theme of the series and the world in which it takes place. The wasteland we see in Dr. Bosch's videos portrays a bleak world, riddled with corpses, body parts, chaos, and danger, ruminating in the cancelled game which inspired it, left unfinished and discarded only to be picked apart for scraps. It's hellish in the most traditional sense, a combination of Hieronymus Bosch's fantastical hellscapes and the post-war industrial nightmare of Mad God. But in all the ways this world is horrific and dangerous, it is also chaotic and obscure. Very rarely does there seem to be a rhyme or reason to the events that take place, the quests or the impossible rooms. And things are clearly broken, defective or missing menus, glitches and corrupted data. It can feel random and senseless. But in the end, the player can't help but continue exploring. It's the only world they have left to explore, and as the audience, we can't help but continue to watch. At times, it feels like there's some intention in the chaos, some method to the madness, maybe some unseen entity guiding us or some source to everything that's here. but sometimes not. And the question Dr. Bosch seems to ask us, as all of the references it includes did before it, is this. In a world which is random, chaotic, even cruel, seemingly meaningless, can you find meaning? Is the search for truth or answers inherently doomed? Are we destined to go down with the ship, fall into madness or an endless void in our quest to find intentionality or purpose in randomness? This question could of course be applied to a lot of the relevant concepts which surround this series. Reading too deeply into an artist's life through their art, something we do see at times in the web series community, or perhaps intense interest in putting together the remains of a game which has long been dead, or the enduring mystery of a cryptic Russian radio broadcast which remains unsolved. But I would not limit these themes to just a few applications. These questions have been ruminated on since time immemorial and exist at the very core of humanity's drive to continue creating in the face of the universe, if you'll allow me to be a little dramatic. And I think what is so intriguing about Dr. Bosch is it's not just about finding the answers to the mysteries in the game. Dr. Bosch's videos ask us to think about the search itself, what the drive to find meaning says about ourselves, and ask us to question whether any meaning can be found at all. I want to end this video with a sort of call to action as it pertains to this series. I am not an expert in any of the things I've discussed here. I hope that I haven't messed up anything too badly, but I am not an art historian, literary professor, philosophy major, or even a super hardcore Fallout player. I am sure that there is a lot of stuff in this series which I missed, or connections still to be made. And as far as I can tell, it's still in the works. More entries are yet to come.
And in fact, there is a new video that was released literally hours after I finished this video. So you have something new to go watch right now.
And I think this is the perfect time for everyone out there who may be in the comments ready to correct a mistake I've made, because this is exactly your type of thing. The type of thing you know all about or are great at solving, to go check out the series for yourself and join the burgeoning community over there unraveling its mysteries. Really, I wanted to make this video to get more eyes on it, because it may not be my area of expertise, but I know there are people out there for whom this is exactly what they've been looking for. Thank you all for watching. If you like this kind of thing, you can support me on Patreon for only $2 and get access to a bunch of behind the scenes, commentary tracks, exclusive reviews, and more. Also, the song I made for this video, Lone Wolf Radio, is available on Spotify and pretty much everywhere else, along with free downloads on my Patreon, no subscription required. Thank you all again, and I'll see you all next time.